A little over 3 years ago, Vladimir Putin and Russia decided to illegally invade a sovereign nation in Ukraine. Ukraine, being a great ally of the West and the United States, this understandably caused uproar and disgust. Since then, there's been countless casualties suffered on both sides. Depending on the numbers that you believe, it could be anywhere from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of casualties suffered by Russia and Ukraine, including a Polish soldier who died at the hands of a Ukrainian misfire. Understandably so, the United States and Western nations have been vehemently opposed to Vladimir Putin and Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, especially the United States, a righteous country who would never attempt to invade or assassinate a foreign adversary or leader if they were deciding to stage nuclear weapons 7 miles off the coast of one of its states. An anonymous source on the ground has provided me with footage recovered from a deceased Ukrainian soldier's GoPro. As you can see, since the United States has halted military aid to Ukraine, Ukraine has had to resort to using medieval tactics and weaponry to defend regions that 90% of Westerners could not point to on a map, despite being quote-unquote ardent Ukraine supporters. As a final warning, this footage may be disturbing. The views and opinions expressed by past, present, and future guests of Xendependently Minded have not been expressed by me, and they may not even be shared by me. The views and opinions that I express are, of course, satirical. If you're confused, then try this thought experiment to help you understand. If you like what I said, or say, and you agree, then you can tell yourself that it is my real opinion, and it's not satirical. If you don't agree with what I say, and you're disgusted and repulsed by it, then obviously I'm just being satirical. Obviously, these aren't my real opinions, because this is clearly a character, and nobody would actually have these opinions, would they? Anyway, enjoy the episode. How's it going, boys and girls? It's your boy. Complain a lot and never offer any logical solutions. Back at it with another episode of The Price is Right. Got a lot to talk about. Quite a few things have happened in the last few weeks since I last screamed into the void and you guys listened for some reason. Hope that footage at the beginning of this video wasn't too shocking. I'm sorry to start off the episode on such a dark note, but sometimes, reality is dark, sometimes reality is sad, and we have to face it. We have to face the truth. War is horrible, and like my anonymous source on the ground in Ukraine reported to me, and as you probably saw, unless you skipped through, Ukraine is, they're in a tough space. They're in a tough space without the United States, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later. First thing I wanted to talk about, Germany had its election at the end of February, so about 2 weeks ago almost. They ended up electing the fake conservative party, the fake Christian conservative. I leave the biggest air quotes you could possibly imagine. That is the party that Germany decided to elect. So they decided we're sick and tired of the fake liberal coalition. I guess you could say real liberal, neoliberal, the 21st century version of liberal, not the JFK version of liberalism and democratic ideals. Because if they followed that school of thought, Germany wouldn't be where it's at right now. I promise you that JFK facing a similar situation would not allow what's happening in Germany to allow, or any other country, the United States, or so on. Germany decided they're sick of the liberal coalition, so they decided to elect the fake conservative Christian party that Angela Merkel comes from. So if you don't know who Merkel is, she was the previous chancellor of Germany before Olaf Scholz. Olaf Scholz was basically recalled to put it in American terms. There was a vote of no confidence, and his coalition government fell apart, and then eventually it was time for him to be voted out, or the vote of no confidence, and it succeeded. So Germany had snap elections, and they elected the same party that globalist pig Angela Merkel comes from. Under her tenure as chancellor, which I believe was 16 years or it was 12 years. Either way, the damage that she did it's very apparent in Germany, especially if you're somebody who's visited or lived in Germany before her time or at the beginning of her tenure and now, or you visited recently. She's responsible for over 1 million refugees coming into Germany legally under her tenure. That's not counting the illegals. She's a monster, and she truly began the slow, torturous death of Germany and the European Union. Because every other country in the European Union is facing similar issues to Germany on different levels of what would you call it? There are different stages of this hostile takeover, this infection of Europe. The UK, Germany, and Sweden kind of led the charge in this, taking an innumerable amount of unchecked, unfiltered, unregulated migrants from countries. And I'm not saying that I'm against taking refugees. The United States takes lots of refugees. When Donald Trump became president, he signed an executive order to give refugee status to many South Africans that are being discriminated against. And no, it's not the black ones that are being discriminated against in South Africa right now. So I'm not opposed to refugees. I'm just opposed to, as I always have been, as I've consistently spoken about in real life and on this podcast, I'm opposed to unfiltered, unregulated, unmitigated immigration. Period. Most reasonable people are. Even those who are a lot more open. They may or may not have one time said, no borders, no humans illegal. They're now even saying, hey. I've got a couple people in my neighborhood who've been assaulted by these illegals, and nothing was done to them or about it because they're not even tracked. I don't even know their names. Or they happen to have the same name as 17 trillion other refugees. Anyways, Angela Merkel really aspired to be the supreme leader of the EU, if that's even a thing. The supreme leader of NATO. She led the charge in sanctions against Putin, sanctions against countries, levying fines against countries that didn't take unchecked amounts of immigrants and refugees. And like I said, I don't have a problem with all refugees, obviously. That kind of goes without saying, but unfortunately I'm going to say it. Sweden, Germany, and the UK took in the most amount of refugees following the 80s and 90s and the endless wars that the West carried out against the Middle East, destabilizing many countries in the region, displacing a lot of people, and Sweden, UK, and Germany took the most amount of immigrants. The UK, along with other issues, decided they were tired of this crap, but immigration wasn't really the main reason that probably British people voted for Brexit, but it was just to kind of reclaim sovereignty, because when you're a part of the European Union, you don't really have independent sovereignty. You don't have individual country sovereignty. You can see it in any time there is a country in the EU that decides that they don't like the globalist agenda, like basically putting the nail in the coffin for farmers, not taking unchecked amounts of immigrants, stuff like that. Poland faces scrutiny for refusing to take refugees. Hungary is paying €1 million fine every single day until they start taking refugees, which is not, that's a lot of money for a country like Hungary. Hungary is not as powerful of a nation as Germany, France, Sweden, the UK. So Germany, unfortunately, didn't learn its lesson. I do really hate and get turned away from the people that say things like, oh, you voted for this, you deserve bad things to happen to you because you voted for the wrong party. That's retarded. If you say that, you're an uneducated buffoon. You're a dumbass. You don't understand anything about anything. Just because people disagree doesn't mean they deserve bad things to happen to them. Because I've seen a lot of people will say, you voted for this. If you get bashed in the head by an illegal, or if you know somebody that gets assaulted by an illegal, you voted for this. Nah, it's not true. Some people voted for the Conservative Party for 1 to 3 reasons. Most people vote for three main reasons. And it could just be, hey, I'm tired of this liberal coalition. The Conservative Party, at least when Merkel was president, chancellor, Germany's economy was doing better. We were on a better track, so that's why I decided to vote for this party. It's stupid to sit here and say people deserve bad things to happen to them because they made a different decision than you. Plus, everybody who says these stupid things, they don't live in Europe, they don't live in Germany, they haven't even left their small, crappy town in the United States, let alone a state or other country. So, it's unfortunate. I hope that maybe this party has learned from its mistakes, but it probably hasn't. It's similar to the situation that Canada is facing. Yes, Trudeau did resign. He's still yapping. He's still doing things on his way out to make sure that Canada stays permanently screwed. And he's trying to... He hates Canadians more than anybody in the entire planet. He hates Canadians more than the offspring of some of the Native American tribes that were brutalized by the French Canadians and British that settled in Canada. That's how bad he's doing. But the lady that's replacing him is arguably worse. So it's not like Canada's home free. They're just bringing in a woman from the same political party that he's a part of. So RIP Germany, RIP Europe. There's a lot of famous stories, a lot of brave, heroic tales of certain car manufacturers defending Europe hundreds of years ago in brave battles where they're outnumbered by another car manufacturer that is still around today. This car manufacturer was trying to invade Europe. It was trying to bring its faulty wires, its faulty oil systems, and its faulty brake systems to a more healthy, respected, and followed car manufacturer. And these outnumbered people, they fought bravely to prevent this poison from spreading and infecting Europe. Just for a bunch of blue-haired cucks who sit in the cuck chair in the hotel rooms to let them in for free. Let them in for free, and then there are even some stories of them being assaulted by them, saying, you know what, I'm not going to report this because I don't want people to discriminate against this group of people. They'll say silly things like, that's racist, despite one ideology not even being tied to a race, it being a religion, which has no ethnicity. Or it's not supposed to. Moving on to the next bit I want to talk about. Speaking of ideologies and car manufacturers that are mysteriously linked to a lot of unfortunate events, lots of times involving violence and non-consenting practices, I guess you would say. Syria is a dump. It's been a dump. It was a dump before, it's a dump now. Unfortunately, there was a time that Syria was not a dump, and that was before some tinkering committed by the United States and other Western nations. But what's in the past is in the past. So Syria, like I said, it's been a dump for a while, but now it's a dump where religious minorities aren't protected. Religious minorities like Christians. Right now there are videos of Islamists riding non-Muslims like dogs, making them bark, and then at the end shooting them in the head. How could such a great guy like Julani, the new unelected leader of Syria, how could he allow this to happen? I was told for years and years and years that Bashar al-Assad was the worst thing to happen to Syria since the United States got involved and bombed them unendingly under Barack Obama's presidency, and behind Donald Trump's back, his first term as United States president. I was told that Bashar al-Assad was terrible. I was told that he tortured people, he silenced journalists, he beat people down, he was a horrible person, which he was. He was not a great leader. His tenure was not all sunshine and rainbows, but as I've said in the past, at least religious minorities were protected when he was in charge of Syria. No country in the Middle East is without its conspiracies, without its shadiness, and without its kind of anti-democratic practices. And that's fine. Because guess what? Not all cultures are equal. I know that's an unpopular thing to say, and that's something that lots of people take offense to, but it's true. What works for the United States may not work for Syria. What works for Syria may not work for the United States. That's the beauty of the human race. We have a ginormous planet. A lot of people say it's a small planet in comparison to the rest of the galaxy, but it's our planet. And humans have been around for a long time. And everybody deserves to have their own sovereignty, their distinct cultural makeup, their belief systems, without being intruded on. Now, I hate to say it, I wish the entire world's women had the same amount of rights the United States women have, that American women have, that many women have in Western European nations, Eastern European nations. But they don't. And we can't force that on them. I wish that every single human on the planet had free speech. I wish every single human on the planet had the ability to practice whatever religion they wanted without being beheaded and put on an ISIS music video, or having to be ridden like dogs, being forced to bark and then being shot in the head for the world to see. I wish that's how it was, but that's not how the world is. And now Syria is worse off than it was before, somehow. It already was one of the most dangerous nations in the world, especially in the Middle East, and now it's worse. So how could a great guy like Julani allow this to happen? You know, there's that famous interview, his first majorly televised interview, shortly after he and his group started a civil war and kicked al-Assad out. In that interview, they were very respectful to him. They didn't really ask a lot of tough questions. The British media and the Western media, they all started talking about this guy. He was a force for good. He was a rebel leader. And even though there are no elections in Syria, even though this guy took over with violence and he wasn't elected, the West claims to hate dictators. They hate power-hungry monsters. But they've anointed this guy as the next best thing, the guy who can fix Syria. Despite him being a former member of Al-Qaeda, he left Al-Qaeda to create an offshoot of Al-Qaeda called Al-Nusra. So many people might be surprised that these types of atrocities are being committed against Christians and other minority religious groups in Syria, but I'm not surprised at all. This guy's done it his entire life. Just because the West anoints a leader doesn't mean they're great. In fact, it might be like the Jim Cramer style, Jim Cramer strategy. Whatever Jim Cramer says, whatever the West says about a leader, believe the opposite. We'll call that the legacy slur media effect. Next thing I wanted to talk about, something that I am not seeing talked about at all. So little so that I thought that it might have been a fake story, but it's true. I've talked about this guy before. Georgescu, probably didn't pronounce him right. Those Eastern Europeans, they got some funny letters in their alphabets. I tell you what. Georgescu, the democratically elected leader of Romania, has been arrested. He's been arrested. What is his crime? Being anti-war and pro-Romanian. So Georgescu opposed, probably won't be for long, unfortunately. He opposes the new NATO base being built in Romania. That would be the biggest NATO base in all of Europe. He's been accused of being a Putin ally with no basis, in fact. He went on Sean Ryan's podcast, who's one of the biggest podcasters in the world right now, and he outright said, I am not a Putin ally. I don't even like Putin. I don't care about Putin. I care about Romania. And it is not in Romania's interest to build the largest base in Europe, the largest NATO base in Europe, on Romanian soil. Because, as he said it correctly, NATO is supposed to be a defensive alliance. Russia's not attacking Romania right now. I know a lot of hawks that love the idea of World War III because they hate their existence, they hate humanity, they hate life so much that it makes them foam at the mouth. They start chomping at the bit at the idea of nuclear war and the human loss that would come from from a nuclear war. Lots of these people will claim that, when Russia's done struggling to invade the poorest nation in all of Europe, they're going to go and they're going to do Poland next. They're going to get Latvia. They're going to get Lithuania. They're going to reinstate the Soviet Union, and then it's going to be like the Cold War all over again. Whoa. People who say things like this might say that Russia is going to attack Romania, and that justifies the use of and the creation of the largest NATO base in all of Europe. But it's just not true. It's just not true. And it's unfortunate that nobody is talking about a democratically elected leader who fought the establishment, stood up to the establishment, being arrested. We probably will never hear from him again. And it's very sad, because the same thing has happened to Romania's neighbor, Hungary. Viktor Orban is the longest tenured leader in Europe. He's repeatedly getting attacked, repeatedly getting smeared, repeatedly being labeled as far-right, pro-Putin. It was impossible for me, when I looked up Georgescu, to share the news that he had been arrested. It was impossible, and I'm not being dramatic, it was impossible to find an article that didn't either label him as far-right or pro-Putin or both. There was not a single article on the internet that existed that didn't label him as one or both. So when the entire established media agrees with the term and is repeating the same thing, it is best practice to, at the least, be suspicious of it, and at best, dismiss it completely and do your own research. Next thing I wanted to talk about, really the last thing I wanted to talk about, the big blow-up from last weekend, Zelensky's visit to the White House. So, obviously, there are mainly two main arguments to this, or viewpoints on this, not only this discussion, this blow-up in the White House, but also the war period. I've looked at both sides as psychos the entire time. When the war began, if you guys remember, if you've been listening long enough, I didn't do an episode for a while. It might have been over a month. And same thing happened when the October 7th massacre occurred in Israel back in 2023. I waited a while to let things develop, and also to do research, to look into these things, because I'm only 25. This is my first, and this is my first podcast. Unlike lots of people my age, it's like a millennial and Gen Z thing to talk about things that you don't understand. I hate doing that. I refuse to do it. So when Russia first invaded Ukraine, I abstained from talking about it until I understood it better. Now that I understand it better, I find myself constantly being just really grossed out by the rhetoric on both sides of this argument. Fortunately, most people happen to actually share my perspective on this conflict. It's just that, like most people who have a job and a life and a family and kids, I don't have a family and kids yet. I have a small family, me and my wife. But unlike a lot of the fringe people who live eternally on the internet, I mean, I have a podcast on it, but I consider myself part of the silent majority. I'm not out there protesting. I'm not out there shutting down public roads. I'm not out there posting on my personal Facebook page, changing my profile picture to stand with Ukraine or whatever. So I like to think that I have a nuanced opinion on this. And it's just one simple opinion. It comes down to one simple perspective, one simple stance. One that happens to be shared by the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, and probably 95% of American citizens. I just want people to stop dying. The meeting itself was interesting. It was civil for the most part, and then it got heated towards the end. I encourage anybody who hasn't seen the whole thing, which is probably most people. Most people saw clips, and they formed their entire opinions. Well, they received their instructions, their NPC instructions, via Bluetooth, and they decided to either, one, parrot talking points of screw Zelensky, screw Ukrainians, they're the worst, They deserve it. Let them die. Let Russia take them over. Let Putin eat them all for breakfast. And then you have the other side that says we should unendingly support Ukraine with no goal, with no end in sight, despite the fact that the average military age in Ukraine is 40 years old, I believe, despite the fact that there are numerous videos of 25-year-old, 24-year-old, 23-year-old young men being chased down highways in Ukraine, getting thrown into unmarked vans, despite the fact that there have probably been hundreds of thousands of dead young men and women from this war in Ukraine, and probably tens of thousands of dead Russians, men and women. Oh, I don't know if women are conscripted in Russia. I'm sure they are. Despite the fact that the front lines have not moved east, they've actually moved west, closer to Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. Despite the fact that, like I said, there is no end goal. People will say, I stand with Ukraine. I stand with Ukraine. Interestingly enough, a lot of these people that I know, they claim to stand for Ukraine. They don't understand what that could possibly mean. We are 89 seconds from midnight on the doomsday clock. 89 seconds. That's closer to doomsday than we were when a Russian Navy ship and a United States Navy ship were facing each other, and there was a miscommunication that almost ended the world and started nuclear war. People who claim to stand with Ukraine, are you willing to go fight in a region, fight for a region that you could not point out on a map? Are you willing to fight and get yourself involved in a conflict, historical conflict that has been brewing, that has existed for hundreds, if not thousands of years? Are you willing to send your kids, your grandkids, to go die? Your nephews, your nieces, are you willing to send them to go die in this conflict? Because that's what standing for Ukraine means. In the NPC, I've received my instructions via Bluetooth, via TikTok drop version of standing with Ukraine. I stand with Ukraine in spirit. But when you don't have a goal in sight, when it's been a failure, almost been a failure. I mean, Ukrainians have been brave. It's true. What Trump said was true. The Ukrainian soldiers have been very brave. Everybody expected Russia to steamroll Ukraine. It's been 3 years now. They're still technically a sovereign nation. Yes, they have a hostile military within their borders, but their numbers are dwindling. They've had to conscript soldiers multiple times, and this cannot continue. This definitely couldn't go on another 3 years. Russia, on the other hand, has a larger population. They have the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. So saying that you stand with Ukraine means you don't actually know what that means. You don't know anything about the region. And I'm not some Eastern European Slavic historian, but I have common sense. And to those who claim, screw Zelensky, screw Ukraine, screw Ukrainians, they're corrupt, they suck, they're Nazis, this and that, do you genuinely wish bad things on them? Why? Why? Have some empathy. Would you genuinely want to simply end a war immediately when you've talked to thousands of families who have lost children to Russia? It's not black and white. No conflict ever is. It's not so simple as screw Ukraine or screw Russia. It's not. It never has been. Zelensky should have signed that mineral deal and could have possibly gotten guarantees from the United States for security in case this happened again. Could promise Russia that Ukraine would never join NATO, although this promise has been made many times. And then all hostages should have been returned. That's probably what they were seconds away from getting. But what I think might be the problem is not technically Zelensky, but it's that Zelensky is he's not like Putin. He's a guy who came out of nowhere. He was anointed by the West. He was anointed by the World Economic Forum. He doesn't have solid ground to stand on, to stand up to the warhawks in his cabinet. What I think happened is, and this is almost pretty much confirmed, Zelensky, Ukraine, and the United States had a deal. Probably Russia was involved. They had agreed to some terms separately. They had a deal, including that minerals deal. Zelensky was supposed to come in. It was supposed to be kind of a commemorative thing. He was going to sign the deal. They were going to discuss some of the details of the security guarantees. And then that was it. This war is over. Hostages return home. The bloodshed stops. But what I think happened is that there are some rabid, bloodthirsty people in Zelensky's cabinet, in his war cabinet, just like Russia. A lot of people don't understand. A lot of people talk about how terrible Putin is. And he's not a good guy. I've never said once that he was a good guy. Never said he was a good person. But Putin is the most restrained leader that Russia has had in a long time. And if you listen to any of the rhetoric behind anybody in Putin's cabinet, anybody that could replace him if something happened to him, they are 1,000 times worse than him. Many of the people in his cabinet have advocated and called for the use of nuclear weapons on Ukraine, on Poland, and other NATO countries. So, the fate of the world and humanity happens to rest on the restraint of Vladimir Putin. The same goes for Zelensky. There are a lot of war-hungry, bloodthirsty people in his cabinet, and I believe they basically threatened him or forced him into doing what he did. And it's unfortunate because I just want the bloodshed to stop. I'm sick and tired of seeing this. And honestly, after seeing all the discourse on this for the past 3 years, people not understanding that this war didn't start in 2022. It didn't even start in 2014. It started back in the 2000s. The United States has played a part, if not orchestrated, not one, but two topplings of government and removals of leaders in Ukraine in the past 25 years. Every time there's a leader of a nation that doesn't even cozy up to Putin and Russia, they just say, hey, I'd like to normalize relations with them. I would like to open up deals and business and the flow of oil and minerals throughout Europe. They mysteriously get taken out, they get toppled, they get removed, and they have to flee and hide for the rest of their lives. And it's so strange to see the short-sightedness, the lack of understanding of history, context, common sense, logic, independent and critical thinking that specifically comes from boomers. Boomers that still live in the 80s. They still live in the Rocky IV era. And in their brain, Russia is still the bad guys. It's like the lyric from the Bob Dylan song, With God on Our Side, where he says, my entire life I've been told to hate the Russians. So if we go to war, it's them that we must fight. It's like people took that lyric and just pounded themselves over the head with it until it became a reality. Boomers actually genuinely, and I'm not kidding, there are people that I know that I love and respect that are genuinely coming out and expecting and hoping and saying, if the president of the United States just came out and said, Putin, you're a bully, Putin, you're a scumbag, that'll just end everything. He'll cower in the corner and say, oh no, how could you call me a bully? It's not like I've been smeared the entire time I've been in power. Both times I've been in power, it's not like I've been smeared and there's been propaganda on a 24/7 stream about me from 30 or 40 nations. These boomers have never had to mediate conflict in their entire life. It's very clear. And it's not just boomers, but the people that changed their profile pictures to, I stand with Ukraine. People with children that are 20, 21 years old that are healthy, that would be conscripted immediately, should there be a need for that. These people never mediated a conflict in their entire life. It's like, if you're the principal of a school, okay? Imagine you're the principal of a school, and there are two kids that just got into a fist fight. This might be the second or third time they've gotten into a fist fight. You're sitting down in a room, you have them separated, and you're talking to them. Why would you pick one kid and say, kid, you're a piece of trash. Kid, you instigated this. Kid, you're ugly. You're fat. Your parents' divorce is your fault. and the other side, you're an angel. You actually get to stay home from school, no homework for the rest of the year. You're an angel. You've never done anything wrong. Is that how you negotiate peace? Is that how you end a fight? Is that how you end a conflict? By shaming one side and then glazing the other? No. This same concept should and can be applied to this war. The same thing happened with Trump being able to bring peace in the Middle East with Israel and Hamas. Speaking of that, right now Israel is seething again because the United States is directly negotiating with Hamas because Hamas claims that they're not going to release the rest of their hostages if Israel decides to start attacking Gaza again or whatever. I'm not really sure. And the United States decided, you know what? We're unable to negotiate and be the mediator between you guys. Understandably so. Israel is still very bent out of shape. They're still very upset. I would be too if this happened to me. What happened to them on October 7th and what's happened to them since 1947. But the United States just decided, screw it. Just like they did with the negotiations to end the Russia-Ukraine war. They left Zelensky and Ukraine out. Because if you can't be reasonable, if you're not willing to make concessions, which in conflicts like this, nobody is going to be the winner in the short term, but in the long term, everybody wins. Because you don't lose human life. And that's the unfortunate thing that happened with Zelensky. Zelensky just head-scratchingly decided, not only did I already turn down a deal a couple months into the war the first time, a war that would have allowed me to keep the territory that I have since lost, would have stopped the war, would have created a new agreement that hopefully Zelensky would have signed, that Ukrainians, many times in the past, there have been agreements where Ukraine is supposed to sign, making them neutral, guaranteeing that they'll be neutral. They won't be a staging ground for Russian weapons. They won't be a staging ground for NATO weapons. They've broken this agreement or just outright haven't signed it many, many, many times. But this was the reality. There was this similar type of agreement a couple months in. Boris Johnson and I believe Victoria Nuland, famous war pigs, famous bloodthirsty demons, they decided to convince Zelensky, pretty much push him to not sign the deal. Since then, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians and Russians have lost their lives. Ukraine has lost more territory, and their pathetic little counteroffensive has made zero difference. Just look at the lines of the war. You can do it right now. So, this strange approach that boomers claimed, I can't believe that they would insult the great leader Zelensky, a guy, again, that nobody knew existed until this war began. Most Americans, especially boomers, don't know what Zelensky is. Couldn't point to Ukraine on a map, couldn't point to the Black Sea on the map, couldn't point to Kiev on the map, couldn't point to Odessa, Crimea, Sevastopol, the Kharkiv region, these oblasts that we're fighting over, that hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives over in the past 3 years. These boomers just think you should come out here and you should insult Putin. Did that approach work for Biden? No, it didn't. It did not work for Biden. We were very close to nuclear war when Biden was president. According to the doomsday clock, we're closer now than we were when Biden was president, but that's just not the case. Unfortunately, and I guess fortunately now, the United States is in communications with Russia. But when Biden was president, there was no communications with Russia, which is not good. Not good at all. Even during the darkest moments, the most tense moments of the Cold War, Russia had a direct line with the United States and vice versa. So to sit here and act like you just have to slur insults to Putin and Russia and that'll end the war and that'll stop them from doing what they're doing is stupid, it's short-sighted, it's illogical, and it's idiotic. Anybody who repeats those talking points, you just kind of know they got them from their Bluetooth received NPC instructions and their TikTok instructions. Because that's just not reality. That doesn't work. You run the scenario, they run the simulation 100,000 times. It fails every single time. And it doesn't come close to bringing about peace and an end to death and bloodshed. So hopefully, Ukraine either decides to sign this mineral deal, or after being forced to use crossbows and swords to defend themselves for the next couple weeks. Hopefully, Zelensky decides to come back, take this deal, and the bloodshed. Work out the details later. Stop the bloodshed, work out the details, and let the cooler heads prevail. Here's to hope for everlasting peace. That's going to do it for this episode of Xendependently Minded. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you took something out of it, positive, negative, neutral, or whatever. I appreciate the support. I appreciate all the feedback and the comments and suggestions and messages I've been getting. Even the negative comments, the people accusing me of spreading misinformation. I had that happen recently when I talked about tariffs that Canada levies against the United States, specifically with dairy and butter. I appreciate all the feedback, regardless of what type it is. Summer is approaching. Summer is not approaching. Spring is approaching. So get yourself some merch. Get yourself a nice trucker hat. Get yourself a water bottle. Some stickers that you can stick on urinals and on bridges and poles and stuff in your cities. Get yourself a nice coffee mug or tea mug if you want, if you're into that kind of stuff. Merch shop is still up. 100% of the proceeds get donated to the Child Mind Institute, a nonprofit organization aimed at helping families that have children that suffer from mental illnesses. It's a great cause, shows that you support the show, and I really appreciate it, and I know that Child Mind Institute and the families that get help will appreciate it as well. That's going to do it for this episode. Catch you guys on the next one. As always, stay safe, stay away from those crazies out there. Thank you.